Hello and welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I'm Carl Christensen. I'm back with Matt and just Matt tonight. And we are going to be wrapping up. Well, I say that with a semi-high degree of confidence, wrapping up our World War II epic podcast series. This is the year 1945, and we will be learning what brings this war to a close. Right, Matt?
Yes, we will be going through all of that.
Okay. And Cameron just joined us as well, actually. So Cameron is here as well. So we do have a trio of podcast hosts.
Yes.
So, all right. All right, Matt, let's dig in. Let's wrap this up. We've got, I guess before Matt gets into our history podcast here, we have had a request from one of our listeners to do another physics podcast. And so we will be getting to that in the near future. So if you know us, once again, for certainly our most well-known podcast, the Quantum Physics Podcast, or any of the other ones that we've done on physics or math, don't worry, we'll get back to that soon. But this is a great World War II history series. So please go back and listen to the other 5 parts or something like that of this, and then wrap up with us here. So Matt, let's wrap it up here.
Okay. Yeah. Hey. So to whatever fans out there that submit requests to us, by the way, just as an aside, if you want us to cover a subject, please do let us know. But please make it a little more specific than just physics. Turns out physics is kind of large. So if there's like a specific branch of physics that you'd like us to talk about, whether it's, fluid mechanics, astrodynamics, or whatever, let us know. What do you want to learn about physics? Because physics itself is big. And if I don't get like more specific, then we'll just do what I want to do, which will end up probably being the physics of Elden Ring, given that that's what I'm thinking about right now. So,
a very interesting subject.
It actually won't be. But all right. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the final year of World War II, 1945. So just recapping where we were at with the end of 1944, pretty much all of the Axis powers, that's Germany, Japan, and to some degree Italy, are really on the back foot right now. The Allies are advancing up through Italy. The Italian government has seen some turmoil and is trying to join the Allied side. The Germans that are still in Italy really do not want that to happen. The Allies have landed in France during 1944, and the British, Americans, Canadians, and French are pushing towards Germany from the west, while the Soviets push towards Germany through Poland, in the east, through Poland and at the time Yugoslavia, and those areas, Romania, Hungary, and so forth. In the Pacific, the Japanese are being pushed back by the United States Navy and the Marines and the Australians and the Allied forces just in that area. The battles are bloody, but the progress is steady. And so with that, we're going to cover this. Yes.
Sorry. In my perception, and over the course, I guess, of the last 5 podcasts we've done, and I guess also just throughout my life of the history classes that I've taken, it always has seemed to me that as soon as the Allies, got a foothold on mainland Europe, like it was essentially just a matter of time. It was a fait accompli or complete, whatever it is. It was just, it was always going to happen that the Germans were going to lose. Is that true? Was there like a counteroffensive? Was it ever the case that the Germans pushed back hard enough that like there was a question as to whether or not we'd actually, the Allies would actually be able to, was it just a question of getting, Normandy, landing on the beaches and then the war's over? I mean, not over, but the tide has turned and it's just a matter of fighting through to get to Germany.
I don't think you can really say that. And the German goals, depending on who you were within the German command structure, kind of changed throughout the course of the final year of the war, from hold our conquered territory to hold Germany to let's not all get executed to okay, maybe let's not get me myself executed. So depending on battlefield successes, Germany potentially could have maintained some of their goals, and that was kind of their strategy towards the end, was to stall for time, grind things to a stalemate, and accept a surrender or a peace negotiation on favorable-ish terms. Like, okay, you took back France, but we still get Germany and no Soviet occupation, things like that.
Okay.
And yeah, there were offensives and counteroffensives that they launched that, the Battle of the Bulge we talked about, that was pretty dangerous for the Americans in that area for a while. Now, on the wider front, would it have made a difference? I don't know, but that could have really hurt. And enough hurt can change a war from a steady march towards victory to a long, drawn-out slog. And the way that World War II ended in Europe in some ways was a long, drawn-out slog. It was not an endless, steady, tromping march to inevitable German defeat. Every mile was paid for in blood, and on both sides. And so we'll talk about some of that as we jump straight in to January 1st, where the Germans launch one of their last offensives. They call it Operation Nordwind, and this is an operation south of the arena of the Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennes Forest. So it's south of that, and this goes on from about most of the month of January. And what happened here is the U.S. 7th Army was down south of the Ardennes Forest. Battle of the Bulge kicked off. The 7th Army sent a bunch of reinforcements up north to help the people, the American units there, maintain their lines and contain the Bulge, leaving the southern area pretty thinly manned over about a 70-mile front. And so the Germans attacked there. And that got pretty dicey for the 7th Army. It was not looking great, and eventually they were able to receive reinforcements that were trucked back down from the Ardennes Forest once that area was stabilized, and they managed to stabilize and contain the front. But that was tough. That was a difficult time for the 7th Army, and they nearly lost ground and people. At the same time, on January 1st, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, launched their last great offensive action. It was Operation Bodenplatte, or baseplate. It's supposed to be this great effort to launch a surprise attack on Allied airfields throughout Europe, catch U.S. and British air power on the ground, and knock it out. And to some degree, they succeeded really well. To some degree, at a tactical level, they did catch a lot of aircraft on the ground. And in fact, the Allied losses were on the order of just shy of 300 planes. The thing is, at this point in the war, the U.S. was churning out a new fighter plane, like one new plane, on the order of single-digit minutes. And so U.S. planes could be replaced. Yeah, at peak production, we were doing one fighter plane every 4 minutes, which is pretty cool.
Was that all in the production in the United States? Or
that's
was
just
it...
U.S. production. I don't know about. And yeah, these are factories that were open 24/7, staffed largely by American women, Rosie the Riveter, that came in, worked shifts, and constantly churned out war machines and sent them off to Europe, where 300 of them were shot up on the ground, 280. Well, and that's American and British losses. The thing is, when you blow up a plane parked on the ground, that's a pain. But the pilot, who has taken shelter in a shelter, lives and walks away. Unfortunately for the German pilots, when their planes were shot down, the pilots went with them. And so during Bodenplatte, the Germans lost about an equal number of planes, but they lost the pilots that went with them. And that was getting really bad for the Luftwaffe. They were already running short of experienced pilots, and Bodenplatte turned into an irreplaceable loss for Luftwaffe commanders and leaders and senior air pilots on the Western Front. The planning for the operation was done in such great secrecy that, yes, it did catch the Allies by surprise. It also caught many elements of the German armed forces by surprise, who were not expecting this thing to happen, and so friendly fire was common, where German air defense would see a plane coming over, not realize that, yes, the Luftwaffe is launching a major amount of sorties today, and they would open fire on their own planes. So Bodenplatte was kind of a short-term tactical success because, surprise achieved. And yes, we knocked out a bunch of Allied war machines, but it was a long-term, well, not even long-term, short-term strategic failure because they lost a bunch of irreplaceable pilots and a bunch of machines. And their war production at this point was not close to what the U.S. was doing. So that was going on. Also at the same time, I am going to cover some of these. These are the darker parts of the war. On January 1st, well, back during the Battle of the Bulge, actually in December of 1944, the Germans carried out what became known as the Malmedy massacre, where about 80 captured American POWs or Allied POWs were just shot by their German captors near Malmedy. Circumstances are, it was bad. It was a war crime. You don't shoot POWs. On January 1st, roughly 80 German POWs were shot by the U.S. 11th Armored Division in, Chinon? I'm going to pronounce that wrong. Chinonye. But that was that massacre, which may have been a reprisal from Malmedy. There's some question as to whether or not those troops even knew that Malmedy had happened. But these types of things, unfortunately, did happen. Malmedy and Chinon are some of the better known and more egregious war crimes that were committed on the Western Front.
Did that happen on the same day?
No. Chinonye was January 1st. Malmedy was back in December of 1944. So Chinonye happened after Malmedy.
Oh, January 1st and sometime
in 1945.
December. Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's January 1st. German counteroffensive kicks off, ultimately runs throughout January and doesn't make the breakthrough that they had hoped for. But the idea was, we're going to punch a hole in the Allied lines and put a lot of pressure on them here. Meanwhile, the Soviets are continuing to put pressure on the Germans on the Eastern Front. They launched the East Prussian Offensive, which is very long, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on, but that runs from January to April. And it is a steady tromp of the Red Army through East Prussia at the time, or areas that were, where East Prussia was, Poland, Germany, that area. Anyway, the point is, I mentioned that this was not like a steady progress. I mean, it kind of was, but it was also catastrophically bloody, and I'll talk about casualties at the end of this. But no Soviet offensive went, smoothly from the point of minimizing loss of life. It may have gone smoothly from the point of we achieved an objective, and I don't care about the human cost. But the second you factor that in, wow, that was pretty bad. Anyway, amongst all of this, As you get toward the end of January into February, you have the month-long Battle of Posen, which is a town between Warsaw and Berlin. I forgot this one. The Reds actually managed to enter Warsaw, which was good of them, I guess, on the 17th of January, after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is over and after the Germans have slaughtered tens of thousands of resistance fighters there. With that, though, they continue marching westward towards Berlin. Posen is on the way. Takes a month for them to knock out this fortification, and it's like a medieval fortress city. Posen is not an easy thing to take down. The initial German commander is not wild about this hopeless defense because he knows it's a hopeless defense. He's relieved by a Nazi fanatic who defends the area for a month, realizes everything is lost, and then commits suicide. Command then passes back to the original general, who promptly surrenders his remaining troops and declares to the Soviet commander that, if it was up to me, I would not have sacrificed lives to defend this indefensible place, and also Hitler is finished. So Posen wraps up around the 23rd of February, and the Soviet army continues westward towards Berlin. The 27th of... I'm sorry?
Sorry, I had another question, and I don't know whether or not there's a good answer for this, but
sure.
Were the German generals or commanders or whatever they were, that was there still like palpable fear of Hitler, killing them, or some type of consequence for them among the Nazi party, even while they were clearly losing?
Not quite. Maybe. I don't know if I can answer that. I don't think it was quite the same fear of like, oh, Hitler's going to kill me if I don't do this. We remember the anecdote from our previous podcast of Hitler promoting, where was it? Stalingrad, I think. Was it Stalingrad? I don't remember. Right. It was somewhere in the Eastern Front. Hitler promoted the German commander to field marshal so that he would accept that his fate was to either conquer or commit suicide, as he made the point that no German field marshal has ever surrendered, and I know you're not going to be the first. The German field marshal promptly surrendered. So, it wasn't the same type of thing. Now, was that more true on the Soviet side? Possibly. We'll get into some of that maybe. But yeah, it was, the thing was, if you didn't do what the Fuhrer said, you would be relieved, and one of his cronies that was willing to execute his insane schemes would take your place, which is what happened at Posen. So, and then, maybe you'd get tried for treason and shot. You can talk to, I think Heinrich Himmler found out about that towards the end, but we'll get to him too. 27th January, Soviets enter Auschwitz concentration camp and liberate that. By the end of January, they've advanced through and control Lithuania. And at the end of January, on the 30th, the Malta Conference starts off. This is a conference where Churchill meets with the combined chiefs of staff, combined meaning from multiple nations. So this is the British and the Americans, and then Roosevelt joins later. And this is in preparation for the Yalta Conference in early February, which will involve the United States, Great Britain, and Russia. Other events in January, on the 19th, Hitler does sign out. This is his authoritarian insanity here. He signs out an order saying that the retreat of any military formation, a division size or larger, must be personally approved by me. So if you're a battlefield commander and you're in an untenable position and you're commanding something like a division as opposed to a battalion or brigade or a platoon or whatever, you can't move until the Fuhrer gives you permission to fall back. Now, at the same time, there's the famous not one step backward order that Stalin gave to his Soviet troops. Worked out about as well for them. So, in terms of lives lost as a result. But other major event for January, on the 20th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected to a 4th term as president. I still don't know how that happened, but it did.
See, our American, well, actually, I'm not sure we talked about it in our government podcast, but turns out American presidents not generally allowed and no longer allowed by law to have more than 2 terms.
Yep. Well, and, FDR, I try to stay somewhat neutral, but on this podcast, I'm not going to. So there's that warning out in advance.
Consecutive terms.
I think it's 2 total. It's 2 total.
No, it's 2 consecutive.
Refer back to our podcast on American government, where I don't think we actually addressed that question. Anyway, moving into February here, because we got about 6 more months to cover. So the Yalta Conference, this happens. It's in Yalta on the Crimea. Stalin goes down there, meets with Roosevelt, meets with Churchill, and he is so Stalin about this, and FDR is so FDR about this. Stalin tells Churchill and FDR that after the war is over, Poland needs to be the Soviet Union's responsibility because the Soviet Union committed a grave sin against Poland. If you refer back to our earlier podcast about how World War II started, it started with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to invade Poland together. And so, yes, Germany invaded first, and the Soviet Union came in a few days later, both of them invading Poland. So Stalin pitches this idea to FDR and Churchill that, hey, we sinned against Poland, and so it is now our responsibility to make restitution and make amends. And under our watchful Soviet care, we will nourish an independent and free and totally fair election having, I pinky promise, Poland. And I sincerely mean it on my Soviet honor. FDR believes this because FDR is FDR. I'm trying to stay neutral, but you can tell it's not coming through very well. Very shortly after this, news gets out about opposition politicians. Oh, by the way, the Soviets enter Warsaw. They promptly install a communist government there. That's great. Yay. If you're a communist in Poland, anyway. If you're part of the opposition, if you're one of 16 members of the opposition, you find yourself getting arrested and executed immediately. News of that gets out. Churchill is immediately concerned, writes a cable to Roosevelt saying, hey, this happened. What do we do? Roosevelt says, oh, that is very concerning. We have to make sure that the Soviets abide by their words and have the free and independent Poland that they pinky promised us. You can imagine how this goes. The other thing that comes out of the Yalta Conference is that they all decide to get back together at a later date to meet again, and they do that in the Potsdam Conference in July, which we will talk about in a bit. You mentioned the words fait accompli. Those words will come up again regarding Poland and the Soviet Union and Potsdam. So, anyway.
A quick question about FDR. I'm not...
Was he immensely naive to trust Stalin?
Okay, well, yeah, so
yes.
That's essentially... Is it... Here's the question, and maybe we don't know, and maybe... But is it complete naivete, or is he sensing a waning support for war and at home, and just knows that this, if I start fighting against the Soviets, this is a never-ending war?
I mean, you can go back and forth on that. I don't know that that's recorded anywhere.
Never.
What I do know is that he has the Manhattan Project in his back pocket.
That's true.
And Truman makes use of that later at
When
Potsdam.
Well, this is going to go beyond the scope of World War II, but I was wondering when the Soviets get nuclear weapons, but we can address that some other time.
We'll do that in the history of nucler weaponry. That'll be a fun one.
Or
right.
the history of the Cold War.
Let's get let's get back to February.
Yes.
13th, Budapest falls. The Soviets take Budapest from the Germans and German sympathizing people there. Anyway, Budapest is now occupied by the Red Army. Meanwhile, back on the Western Front, on the 9th, the French clean up what is known as the Colmar Pocket. This is kind of, these are the last Germans left on the west side of the Rhine River, the last effective area of German military, capability. The French army take that out, and now you have the Allies on the western side of the Rhine, the Germans on the eastern side of the Rhine, kind of staring at each other with the Rhine River in between them. The Rhine becomes important now, because in order for one side to get to the other, you have to cross it. The Germans would really rather not have the Allies crossing the Rhine, and, that becomes a major point of Allied focus going forward. The things that don't, that said, throughout all of this, and we haven't really hit on this as much since we talked about 1943, throughout all of this, strategic bombing is continuing all across Germany and all across Axis-occupied Europe, wherever it is. Heavy bombers taking off from airfields in Great Britain, in liberated France, and just all over the place. And most of these strikes are, again, by the United States, they are precision for the time, high altitude daylight bomb raids where you fly over a target, you see it in your Norden bomb sight, which is a really advanced mechanical computer for its time. You drop a stick of bombs, your entire formation drops on your signal, and in general, your bombs land somewhere near your target. The RAF is doing, the British Royal Air Force is doing night raids using different methods of targeting, which are less precise and just kind of carpet bombing areas. Well, we're going to cover the dark stuff too. On the night of the 13th to the 14th of February, the American Army Air Corps and the Royal Air Force pull off a joint operation to bomb Dresden, and they use firebombs for this one. And this is not precision bombing. There's Dresden, drop fire on it, and they do. And the bombs create a firestorm, and that is not just a term. That is a technical term for a phenomenon caused by superheated wind currents, literally causing a storm of fire to charge around and burn stuff. And that is what happens in Dresden. About 25,000 people are killed in that event. At the same time, Prague is accidentally bombed by forces that are trying to bomb Dresden but miss. Navigation errors take them to Prague instead. They drop firebombs on Prague. 700 people are killed there. Dresden is bad. There's no way around this. I can't morally look at myself and call it anything else. I don't think this one is justifiable. Other raids had, they targeted things of military value. This one was just, we're going to torch the city. Strangely enough, not strangely enough, at the Nuremberg war crime trials after the war, to my knowledge, none of the Germans were put on trial for war crimes related to the aerial bombings of Allied cities in France or in Great Britain. Like anyone that bombed London or anything else, no war crimes trial for you. Why? Because we did the same stuff.
Why?
So,
Why was this such a late tactic?
well, that's kind of what makes it even less defensible.
Right.
Why did you need to knock out Dresden?
Yeah.
Don't know.
Okay.
I don't think there's a good one for that. That was a dark chapter in Allied war making on the Western Front. Unfortunately, World War II is full of dark chapters in war making on all sides. But that was one that the RAF and the U.S. Army Air Corps were responsible for. Let's move into March, where things do not get better, but they get different. So, the 6th of March, the Germans launch another offensive. This is the last one that they managed to do. This is Operation Spring Awakening, which is a follow-on to something called, I think it was Conrad III. And this is down in Hungary. And the Germans actually managed to push the Soviets back quite a ways in Conrad. And then they exhaust themselves, and the Soviets push back. And then the Germans launch Spring Awakening, and they push back against the pushback. Anyway, this goes back and forth and ultimately ends in Soviet victory, and the Germans are once again forced to retreat in the Hungarian sector. And that is the last offensive action that the Germans managed to pull off. From there on, all of their fighting is strictly defensive. Later in March, on the 7th, the Allies, the Allies, but the U.S. Army in particular, stumbles across an intact bridge across the Rhine at Remagen. Nobody expected this. In fact, the Germans didn't expect it. They'd tried to dynamite the thing to collapse it, but there it was. And so the U.S. immediately starts pouring men and material across the bridge. They get 6 divisions and 125,000 troops across this bridge at Remagen. And now you have a bridgehead on the east side of the Rhine River, and suddenly you've got Allied troops able to move deeper into Germany. A little bit later, about a week later, 2 weeks later, Field Marshal Montgomery launches Operation Plunder, which is another major effort to cross the Rhine. I believe it's a bit farther north. And just a massive effort of getting together a bunch of engineering battalions. They lay 1,000 feet of bridge at these different locations to cross the Rhine in 6 hours. And by the 27th of March, they've established a bridgehead on the east side of the River Rhine that's about 35 miles wide and 25 miles deep. Now, not to be shown up by any of this, General Patton, on the 22nd of March, one day earlier, gets one of his groups across the Rhine and puts out a press release because, we might all have been on the same side, but apparently Patton and Montgomery were not the best of friends. So, whatever. At this point, though, by late March, the Rhine River is no longer the obstacle that it was, and Allied troops are now moving eastward on the Western Front at the same time that the Soviets are moving westward on the Eastern Front. Another operation of note, 21st of March, the RAF launches a special operation called Operation Carthage. The idea here is that they are going to bomb a Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. And they've managed to do similar things previously with something called Operation Jericho, where they've basically hit a political prison, knocked down some walls, knocked out a guardhouse. The concussions opened cell doors inside the prisons, and people were able to escape, and that was great. Well, Operation Carthage, they try to repeat the success in Copenhagen, and it goes partially well. They do hit the Gestapo headquarters. They kill a number of Gestapo people there. Unfortunately, some prisoners are killed at the same time. That's kind of unavoidable when you're trying to stage a prison break via low-level aerial bombardment. But the Danish resistance had been asking for this for some time. Unfortunately, the worst part is when one of the Mosquito fighter bombers clips a lamppost and crashes into a school about 1.5 miles from the target. It bursts into flames and burns, and that's not good for anyone in the school. And they start taking casualties. What is worse, though, is that now you have a smoking, flaming pyre in the middle of your city, and your other fighter bombers cue into that, thinking, oh, that must be the target building. So additional mosquitoes now drop bombs on the school. About 80 people are killed at the school. So, I mean, this is the time before warfare evolves. On the American and the British forces, with the modern equipment that they have and the use of precision-guided munitions that they have today, these types of incidents don't necessarily happen because you lack technical capability, but they still happen today because of factors like this, because of misidentification, because of something going wrong, where a drone strike gets authorized and takes out a bus full of kids because somebody said that's a truck full of gun-toting militants. Unfortunately, this happened here. And so Operation Jericho was a success. Operation Carthage here, while it did meet its goal, it came at a pretty significant cost of innocent life. And it was just what do you do in that case? So enough philosophizing about that. Let's move on to a better accomplishment. 24th of March, in conjunction with Operation Plunder, which is Montgomery's effort to get across the Rhine, the Allies launch Operation Varsity, which is the largest single-day, single-event airborne drop ever, where the Allies, the RAF, and the U.S. Army Air Corps, working with the British Army and the U.S. Army, put 16,000 paratroopers on the ground on the east side of the Rhine. And
16,000.
Yeah, a lot of planes.
That's insane.
It is. This is the largest airborne drop in history. I don't think that one's going to be equaled. But they take a number of German prisoners and they secure an additional 2 bridges over the Rhine up in the northern area. And so as March comes to a close, Eisenhower sends out a demand to Germany to surrender. The Red Army is steadily advancing through on the Eastern Front. On the 29th, they get into Austria. And that kind of sets the stage for the final confrontations in Germany. Let's move briefly over to the Pacific, and then we'll come back to this. Going back to January in the Pacific, the Americans have just survived somehow the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and now they're invading the Philippines. On the 9th of January, they land on Luzon. There are a couple things that go on early in here. On January 25th, as a prelude to a major battle, the U.S. Navy bombards the island of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima actually gets the invasion of Iwo Jima kicks off sometime later, and it is incredibly bloody. This happens later in February, and I'll come to it. But the other thing in January of note in the Pacific is on the 30th. It's the raid at Cabanatuan, or the Great Raid. And this is one of the earlier examples of what we would call a special forces style operation, where a small group attacks a prisoner of war camp, a Japanese run prisoner of war camp, and manages to free 500 Allied prisoners of war. And they start this off by having a U.S. night fighter fly over the camp. It's a twin-engine fighter. They shut one of the engines off. They restart it. The engine backfires. It's making all kinds of noise. It's flying super low. It's looking like there's like some kind of stricken bird flopping around over the camp, and it is absolutely enchanting to all of the Japanese guards who do not know what is going on other than this airplane is actively dying over their prison camp. Nobody thinks on the Allied side thinks that this is going to work, but it does work. And the ground elements then achieve complete surprise, knock out all of the Japanese guards, and free 500 people. Later, they launched a similar operation in late February, the Los Baños raid, and they free over 2,000 military and civilian prisoners that are held in a Japanese internment-style camp.
Wow.
So yeah, things are going a little bit better there.
Thinking outside of the box.
It is. And nowadays, I mean, operations like this, we have dedicated teams in countries around the world that plan for bizarre operations like this. We call them special forces, and countries around the world have them. But this is one of the first examples of something like that actually being pulled off. Conventional forces get back into it on the 3rd of February, where they start the Battle of Manila, and this is terrible. This is one of the more horrific bloodlettings of the war, and it's terrible largely because of the actions of the Japanese, combined with the I'll just go into it. There are 16,000-ish Japanese Marines that are in Manila. The commanding general, I think it's Yamashita, tells everybody, all right, we're retreating. We're not doing this. The commander of these 16,000 says, no, we are honor bound to stay, and we are going to stay, and we are going to kill anyone who comes near here. And then they start killing everyone around them, including the civilians. And Manila becomes a scene of systematic rape, execution, mutilation, and murder on the part of these 16,000 Japanese Marines on the local population at the same time as they are fighting and losing to the advancing U.S. Army and Marines. And at the end of this, as the U.S. is advancing, they don't really have precision fires. They are using artillery to level everything that has the potential to shoot back at them. They're not necessarily targeting civilians actively, but if there's the possibility that a shot could come from that civilian building, I'm going to take it down. And so they do. And at the end of this, as a result of the indiscriminate U.S. advance and the deliberate massacres by the Japanese troops, about 100,000 civilians are killed in Manila. 90% of the city is flattened.
100,000.
It's really bad. Of those 16,000 Japanese Marines, well, the Japanese suffered about 16,000 casualties killed. So, I mean, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's devastating.
American losses were comparatively light because they advanced under a curtain of artillery fire. But that was pretty grim, and this was especially bad. The Japanese were losing; they were frustrated they were losing, and so they took it out on the civilian population. And it was not just, this was deliberate and systemic. Everything from execution and rape parties to forcing people to be human shields to everything else. It gets worse the next day in terms of loss of human life, where the U.S. launches the first firebomb raid on Japan. And I don't remember which city they hit, but the U.S. had been bombing Japan. Again, high-altitude, daylight precision strikes using long-range B-29 Superfortress bombers. The problem is that we didn't understand wind currents as well as we do now, and there is such a thing as a jet stream, and it was blowing bombs off target. The problem for the Japanese was that somebody realized that Japanese cities are largely made of wood and paper, and they all burn. And an incendiary bomb doesn't actually need to hit its target as long as it hits something nearby. And so we launched a firebomb raid, and it was very effective. On the 25th of February, they launched another high-altitude raid on Tokyo using firebombs, and it was pretty limited. And we'll jump ahead. In March, though, on the 9th and 10th of March, they launched Operation Meeting House, which is a large-scale raid on Tokyo using firebombs, and it's run at night. And the way that they do it is they aim at a particular quarter of the city, an industrial working-class quarter, and they basically drop a big X of bombs, and then the subsequent waves just aim at the big burning X. And sure enough, the incendiary weapons are incredibly effective. And the death toll on this one, the estimates are kind of all over the place, but in general, they range from about 80,000 to 100,000 civilians killed in one raid, with anything from another 100,000 to another million injured. Estimates are all over the place on that one. Regardless, it is the single deadliest air raid in history. Not even the nuclear weapon drops, not even Dresden, none of those were as costly in human life as the Tokyo firebombing raid on the 9th of March. This one is a little more complex. Loss of life on that scale is absolutely catastrophic. You know what? It is more complex, but the complexity discussion is for another setting, and so we will leave it at that. But firebombing continues, and it's very, very effective at setting Japanese cities on fire. And so that becomes kind of the tactic right up until August, is to do these firebomb raids that just devastate Japanese cities. Meanwhile, in February, back to February, the Battle of Iwo Jima kicks off on the 19th. This is incredibly bloody. It's Marines and U.S. Army. We land a whole bunch of people there. This is the only battle in the Pacific where the U.S. suffers more casualties than the Japanese in terms of killed and wounded. However, the Japanese suffer 18,000 killed and 216 taken prisoners of war, and that's it. That was everyone. I mean, that's the survivors, is the 216. On the U.S. side, there's 27,000 casualties. Only 6,000 are killed, and it ends in the U.S. occupying Iwo Jima and the Japanese garrison there is essentially being annihilated. This is the scene of the famous flag raising photo where the U.S. Marines put up the American flag over Mount Suribachi. You have the four of them putting the flag up there. There's a lot of debate over whether or not Iwo Jima was of strategic significance enough to justify the loss of life. In general, the consensus seems to lead towards no. It was used as an airstrip. B-29s did land there, but there were other fields that could have served the same purpose. One of the things that it could have been used for was a base for long-range fighter escort for the B-29s, because during those high-altitude daylight raids, they were operating alone, and they were taking losses to Japanese fighters. However, right around the time that we actually took Iwo Jima, the B-29s switched their tactics to low-level night raids, where Japanese fighters were not effective. And so the number of fighter escort sorties flown from Iwo Jima was like 10. So not perhaps the greatest investment. So with that, let's finish up through March. Bombing continues throughout March. Nagoya is bombed on the 11th. Tokyo is hit again on the 20th. Tokyo is hit several more times. And the loss of life in these firebombings continues to be catastrophic. On the 19th of March, all of this is joined by U.S. Navy bombers as part of the American Task Force 58, the Navy Task Force, which begins bombing Japanese naval bases. So that'll kind of take us through March in the Pacific. Let's go back to Europe, where things are about to end. As we get into April, this really is the end for Nazi Germany. On the 9th, the last of their 2 large surface warships are sunk by the Royal Air Force, the Admiral Hipper and the Admiral Scheer. They hadn't really been doing much, but now they're just completely done. On the 12th, the major event, the 12th of April, is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, having finally realized that he cannot trust Stalin, dies. And Harry S. Truman becomes President of the United States. There is brief hope in Hitler's higher circles that this will lead to a fracturing of the Allied alliance, and that somehow that will be something that can lead to Germany being spared. That doesn't happen. On the 16th of April, the Russians, who are now right outside Berlin, the Soviets, who are now right outside Berlin, engaged the Germans in the Battle of the Seelow Heights, where, again, the Germans are beaten and pushed back eventually. And the Battle of Berlin really kicks off on the 16th of April. This runs through the 2nd of May, and the Allies in the West deliberately slow their advance to allow the Soviets to take Berlin. I guess this must have been some kind of negotiated thing, but whatever. The Soviets wanted to take Berlin. They did. And they did so at the cost of about 81,000 killed in action and 360,000 total Soviet casualties during the Battle of Berlin. If anyone is familiar with the internet and the meme downfall, where the Hitler finds out meme, where he launches into his tirade, that happens in April. On the 21st, Felix Steiner is ordered to launch an attack on the invading Soviet forces. He cannot get sufficient forces together. His attack doesn't happen. On April 22nd, in the Führer bunker, Hitler is informed that Steiner was not able to make his attack. He launches into a tirade, vows that he will fight to the bitter end and will not allow himself to be taken prisoner. And that is the scene recorded in the movie Downfall, and subsequently a million old internet memes. And so Hitler lasts another 8 days. He marries his mistress, Eva Braun, and then they both commit suicide a day later on 30th of April. And so, and in fact, we're now 2 dictators down, because on the 28th of April, 2 days previously, Benito Mussolini is recaptured by partisans, and he and his wife are strung up and shot. And so the Italian fascist dictator is done, and Hitler has committed suicide. Joseph Goebbels, I don't know how to pronounce that. Who knows? He is made chancellor, and Admiral Karl Dönitz, who was the commander of the German Navy and their U-boat forces, everything, he is made president. Goebbels does not last very long. In fact, he lasts like a day. On 1 May, Hans Krebs tries to negotiate a surrender of Berlin to the Soviet commander Zhukov, I don't know. However, Goebbels hasn't given him authorization, and so even though he negotiates a surrender, it doesn't count. Goebbels then commits suicide the same day, so that's out of the way now. Helmut Weidling surrenders Berlin the next day on May 2nd as the Soviets take the Reichstag. Can I ask,
sorry, not to interrupt the ending of the war in Europe, but why did. I absolutely did. Why was Mussolini's wife killed?
I actually don't know that one. I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
And then there's always the fun conspiracy theory that Hitler actually went to Argentina.
That is, and see our podcast on conspiracy theories for how valid you should treat that one.
Or was it Venice? Something like that. It's one of those.
South America
I think
somewhere.
it was The Dark Side of the Moon. It was documented in the acclaimed film Iron Sky. Anyway, let's get back to reality here.
Okay. Yes.
So
There
this
were
is
a lot of Nazis that fled to South America. That is proven.
yes, that did happen. But Hitler was not one of them. He died. All right. On wrapping it up. I mean, on the 7th of May, Germany announces unconditional surrender, and on the 8th of May, or the 9th of May for the Soviets, for reasons I don't understand, the Allies declare Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. I don't know why it's the 8th for the Americans and the British and the French, and I don't know why it's the 9th for the Soviets. Thought it would be the same day. Supposedly, the ceasefire was to take place 1 minute after midnight, so maybe that's why. But whatever. And so that's it for the war in Europe. The war in the Pacific does not go on a lot longer either. April is dominated by Operation Iceberg, which is the invasion of Okinawa, and this is another catastrophically bloody event. This is, in fact, the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. Out of the American invading force, which is, again, Army and Marines, there are 50,000 U.S. casualties. 12,500 of them are killed in action. On the Japanese side, it is way worse. 77,000 Japanese killed in action. Additionally, there are about 30,000 Okinawan conscripts that are killed as well. What is worse is the toll on the Okinawan native population. Estimates are all over the map on this one, but many tens of thousands are killed. Many of them have been told by the Japanese forces there that the brutal, bloodlusty Americans will, kill, maim, rape, torture, basically do all the things that had happened in Manila. And so many of the Okinawans, as the Marines and the Army soldiers are advancing, commit suicide because they don't want to deal with the barbary that they have been told will be coming at the hands of the Americans. They're all surprised, the survivors are surprised, when that does not come. But Okinawa, it's kind of in two parts. The northern part of Okinawa is cleared by about 18 April, so in about 2.5 weeks. The southern part of Okinawa lasts a lot longer. It goes into like June. But yeah, that is the bloodiest single battle fought by the U.S. in the Pacific. One of the side notes to that one is the Japanese make an effort to defend Okinawa using the last of their ultra-heavy battleships from the Yamato class. It is the Yamato. The Musashi had been previously sunk at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Yamato is the one remaining super-heavy battleship armed with its 18-inch guns. They give it enough fuel to get to Okinawa, where the intention is that they are going to beach it and use it as coastal artillery to repel the incoming U.S. fleets. The Yamato does not make it. It is hit by a massive air attack. It is a well-coordinated attack. American torpedo bombers exclusively target one side of it to ensure that the Japanese can't do effective damage control by counter flooding. They just poke a whole bunch of holes in the one side so that you can't correct that kind of damage and the resultant list. But after a massive torpedo and air attack, the Yamato is sunk. And that's pretty much it for the Japanese fleet. As you go into June, the Americans suffer a setback due to a typhoon, which hits Halsey's fleet, and we lose a whole bunch of airplanes that are swept off of carrier decks from that one. Bombing of Japan continues on the 15th. Osaka is hit. And throughout the other theaters in the Pacific, Brunei, China, Burma, India theater, the Japanese are in general retreat and are being pushed back as the Australians, the Indians, the British, the Americans, and others continue to press forward. By the 5th of July, the Philippines are completely liberated. By the 10th, Tokyo is being raided by another U.S. Navy task force, Task Force 38. Weirdly, everybody now starts declaring war on Japan, like everyone. Italy and Norway declare war on Japan in July. But
Just
the big
jump on
event,
the bandwagon, huh?
I guess. I mean, Norway might have been willing to jump in earlier, except until recently they'd been under German occupation. Italy, likewise, had been kind of preoccupied. The big event for July, though, the big two events for July are on the 16th and 17th. On the 16th is the Trinity test, a nuclear detonation, the first successful nuclear weapon detonation down in the United States. And at that point, we have the bomb. The very next day, the Potsdam Conference kicks off. And Roosevelt, now finally realizing that Stalin is just as trustworthy as everyone else has been telling him that Stalin is, he actually has a card that he can keep in his back pocket, is what he thinks. Also, he's dead by now, so I guess it's Truman. But the other thing, Stalin already knew about the bomb because of espionage within the Manhattan Project. He was well aware of the U.S. efforts to generate the nuclear weapon and that it worked. So that was no real surprise to him. Truman goes to the Potsdam Conference. He is annoyed with Stalin, and he takes a much firmer hand. And he mentions, yeah, we've got a new weapon. And so he's trying to kind of turn the tide, but you use the words fait accompli. At this point, Stalin has said, hey, all of our proposals that we had from the Yalta Conference about taking land from Poland and in exchange giving them land in eastern Germany, that's already happened. It's done. So fait accompli. We've made these changes. Imagine that. Imagine not being able to trust Stalin. So, anyway, imagine... Well, leave it at that. Imagine that happening today with anyone else. Oh boy. Yeah. All right. Wrapping up July. Another major loss of life on the 30th. The USS Indianapolis, shortly after the Trinity test, is loaded up in the United States with the parts for the atom bombs, steams across the Pacific and delivers them to the airfields where they're going to be loaded onto the bombers. After making its delivery, it's torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sunk. Because of the secret nature of its mission, nobody knew that the Indianapolis was out there, and the fact that it is missing is not, and the location of the survivors are not discovered until 4 days later, at which point only 316 of the 1,195 people on board the Indianapolis are still alive. It is the greatest loss of life on a single U.S. Navy ship in history. After that, August 6th, B-29 Enola Gay drops the little boy nuclear weapon on Hiroshima. Tens of thousands are killed, but the dramatic nature of a single plane with a single weapon flattening such a large section of city is huge, and it takes a while for anyone to realize what has happened. long enough that the reaction is not immediate. The calls for surrender go unanswered. And so on the 9th of August, the Fat Man is dropped on Nagasaki. At this point, people figure out what is happening. The Japanese send a message out on August 10th. On August 14th, the Japanese, a right-wing faction in the Japanese government attempts a coup to overthrow the emperor so that we won't have to surrender. This coup does not succeed. U.S. combat units are frozen in place. Nobody is allowed to go on the offensive to shoot anything, but you can defensively shoot things if the need happens, and it does happen. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito makes his famous broadcast telling the Japanese that we are going to surrender. It is time for us to bear the unbearable. And he orders a ceasefire the next day. By 31 August, MacArthur comes in and takes over the government in Tokyo. And on 2nd of September, the Japanese sign the Instrument of Surrender document aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Harbor, formally ending World War II.
Why interrupt the end of all the wars? I was going to say, which parenthetically, that battleship is on display in Pearl Harbor now.
Yes. Yep. But that is it. That is the ending to the bloodiest conflict in human history. You might ask, I mean, we started this out in our first podcast. You mentioned how so many works of literature and fiction and so forth are based on World War II in one way or another, whether or not they are explicitly set in World War II or whether or not they take their themes from it. Well, I mean, the history is interesting. The history is important, and it is something that I believe should be studied and understood, if not for the purpose of getting more people in a mindset where they won't repeat these kinds of things, like we see people attempting to do right now, people attempting to repeat them. I mean, who am I kidding? Putin. What are you doing, dude? So how bad was this, though? This is the part that needs to also be understood. With all of the themes and the stories and the glory and the everything else, what was the cost of all of it? Well, the cost is truly immeasurable. I mean, there is no value that can give you an adequate picture, but you can get a partial picture from looking at the human life cost. When you look at the total casualties, they're in the hundreds of millions. Between the countries that lost the most in the war were, in order, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, China, Japan, the United States, and Great Britain. And the total casualties between all of them were staggeringly high. When you look at deaths from military causes alone, estimates for the Soviet Union vary because they're so big, but it's between 8 and 12 million. That's military deaths from all causes, like soldiers in uniform.
Right.
Between 8 to 11 million Soviet soldiers KIA. On the Nazi Germany side, the number is between 4.5 and 5 million. On the Chinese side, it's between 3 and about 3.7 million. On the Japanese side, it's around 2 million, a little bit over. On the US side, it's around 400,000, and the UK side, just shy of 400,000. When you look at civilian deaths due to some kind of military activity, I'm not going to go through all of them, but China has it potentially the worst, between 7 and 8 million killed of just civilians. And I missed India here. The famine that happened down there was pretty catastrophic as well. Mm-hmm. German civilians killed as a result of air raids, bombings, Soviet executions, all sorts of other things, internal purging, between 1.5 and 3 million. And in the Soviet Union, civilians killed due to military activity was between 4.5 and 10 million. And we remember Leningrad alone was, that was huge.
Yeah, I want to just put some quick perspectives, because sometimes when you're listing these numbers, they're so mind-blowingly large. So like the population of New York City, which is like the most densely populated area in the United States, the population of New York is like between 8 and 9 million. So it's like everyone in New York is dead.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I mean, I'm not even done. Maybe I should be done, but I'm not. So that was civilian deaths due to military activity. That does not count civilian deaths due to war-related famine and disease, which adds another 8 to 9 million for the Soviet Union and another 5 to 10 million to China, leading to total deaths of upwards of 20 million for the Soviets and upwards of 15 for the Chinese. The Germans suffering between 6 and 7.5, and the Japanese between 2 and 3 million. What's even another kind of grim way to look at this is looking at it in terms of percentage of the total population of those countries. So when you look at the Soviet Union, I think it comes down to about what was it? It's about 13% of their population from their 1940 figures was killed as a result of one thing or another during World War II. Within Nazi Germany, it was around 8%, which does not sound like a lot, but
well, it's like you go down the line.
Single-digit percentage? No, that is a catastrophic number of people.
I mean, you round it up to a nice 10%, then you're looking at 1 out of every 10 people. So.
Right. And that's killed. That doesn't include wounded, traumatized, homeless, all the other things that came with war. And so I hope there is some sobering thought that comes through all of this. I mean, generally our podcasts are kind of lighthearted and we try to inject humor where we can. World War II is an important event. It's a defining event, but it was also a catastrophic event. At the same time, I want to emphasize my personal belief. War is terrible, but it is not the worst thing. The worst thing, I believe, is to not oppose the types of evils that started World War II. So I will leave you with that philosophical thought.
Nice.
But that is it. Any final questions for me on any of this?
No, I think that was great. I think over the course of 6 hours of podcasting or something thereabouts, you've got enough to pass an AP history test, if you will.
Yeah.
Well,
stay tuned for our next podcast on how to game the American education system.
Cameron, you had a question?
I was going to say, I think we should mention that the U.S. did dump pamphlets out over the cities before we nuked them. Days before.
I mean,
in Japan.
Sure. I mean, there's many things that many people did to try to minimize suffering. There are many things that people did to try to maximize suffering, and there are things that people did that just weren't understood because World War II was new. So much of the way wars are fought changed in the space of that 5 to 6 to 7 years. And I mean, the long-term effects of nuclear weapons employment are still becoming more and more understood. And you'll notice the U.S. has never deployed a nuclear weapon since and doesn't plan to. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, I guess my wisdom, yeah, in war, you see both the worst of humanity and sometimes the best of humanity, as far as acts of heroism and courage. But you also see just complete depravity and unconscionable, complete lack of anything that we generally ascribe to being human. So.
All right. With that, we will return to our standard programming covering physics of some sort in the future. Let us know if there's a particular topic that you want us to cover, and please don't make it fluid dynamics. I hate fluid dynamics.
Yes, if it comes down to it, though, we'll have Tim present on fluid dynamics, and nobody wants that.
No. Nobody does.
Gatorade. You know he will.
Yes, Tim. He will be the scapegoat. Okay. Well, thank you, Matt. Thanks for the great podcast series here, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks.